Hello there. I am Kios the Ronin Beatmaker, and welcome to this episode of Lounge Ronin. All things, everything. If you're new to the channel, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And on this episode, we're going to discuss the underwater city of Cuba, a new theory, part 1. And as with all things, everything, I implore you to do your own research, as you may be surprised at what you discover about yourself and the world. So without further ado, hello there, let's get into Ronin Beatmaker, and welcome to Ronin Art and Music, home to Ronin Music, Lounge Ronin, all things, everything, the Monday Mindset Rants, and Ronin Reviews. We strive to make holistic and authentic content that aims to improve your individuality, mental fortitude, and peace of mind. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that like button. All right. And this article was written and updated June 24th, 2021 by Brad Yoon. The Underwater City of Cuba, a new theory on its origins, part 1. In his underwater, the mysterious origins of civilizations, Graham Hancock examines the numerous structures that have been discovered underwater around the world. Most of the sites that Hancock discusses lie less than 120 meters, 390 feet, below sea level, which comes as no surprise since the sea level never fell below this mark during the time Homo sapiens walked the earth. Submerged over 700 meters, 2,300 feet, underwater, the Cuban city discovered by Paulina Zelinsky and Paul Weisenweg during the joint Cuban-Canadian expedition is the singular exception. Overturning old theories. How can the existence of this underwater city at this great depth be reconciled with the well-established consensus that the sea level never drops so low? In Hancock's own words, what one would not expect to find in water anywhere near as deep as 700 meters would be a sunken city, unless it had been submerged by some colossal tectonic event, rather than by rising sea levels. And here we have a reconstructed image from the sonar scan of the seafloor off the coast of Cuba. However, the hypothesis that this city was originally built at a higher altitude and subsequently sunk to its present depth through tectonic activity has not stood up to the scrutiny of the experts. And if you're familiar with my channel and how I feel a lot of these experts, as we like to call them, are paid propagandists. To put it bluntly, they're the real pseudoscientists. Greenville Draper of the Florida International University considers it highly unlikely that such an event could have occurred. Nothing of this magnitude has been reported, even from the Mediterranean. Now, if you've recently have seen or watched Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix, or have seen the Frank Dibble and Graham Hancock debate and the post-interview with Graham Hancock and Joe Rogan, you'll know that these so-called experts, they tend to be more wrong than right. And they're paid to be wrong. And they're paid to be more wrong than right. It's no different than meteorologists. Meteorologists are essentially paid to be wrong. How often have we seen meteorologists say, oh, it's going to rain today, and then it's a sunny day? These ideas. But this is just something to take into consideration, doing your own studies. Let's continue. Supposing Draper's remarks rejecting the likelihood of the city having submerged are reliable, we are compelled to accept that the city was built at more or less the same depth that the city is located now. In other words, we are faced with the patently absurd conclusion that the structures were built underwater. The proponents of the aqua ape theory may beg to differ. It is clear that we have reached an impasse. Could there be an alternate theory that satisfactorily accounts to these structures at such depths? I hope, hey, maybe for all we know, the underwater city off of Cuba is where Aquaman is chilling. Maybe Aquaman is actually Cuban. Oh Lord. You know what? I might have to do a video on this aqua ape theory because that sounds fun. Not believable necessarily, but it does sound fun. Let's continue. Great seas and great and vast depths. On the opposite side of the Atlantic Ocean from the Caribbean Sea is the Mediterranean Sea, dividing Europe and Africa. The Mediterranean Sea is an enormous sea over 2,500,000 kilometers, over 255 square miles, that has, at least within its timeline, anatomically modern man always existed. For millennia, ships of successive great nations and empires sailed the Mediterranean, the Phoenicians, Greek, Carthaginians, and Romans among them. In 146 BC, owing to its victories in the Punic Wars against Carthage, Rome achieved what no known civilization had hitherto achieved, namely the control of the entire Mediterranean Sea by a single power. Here we have a map of the Mediterranean Sea. The Romans, rightly so, called the sea that they ruled over Mare Nostrum, our sea. Could the Romans have ever imagined that their sea, long before the dawn of man, was once a dry and landlocked basin? Indeed, they may very well have. In natural history, Pliny mentions in passing tradition of the inhabitants near the Straits of Gibraltar. Quote, they also believe that the Straits of Gibraltar were dug through by him, upon which the sea, which was before excluded, gained admission, and so changed the face of nature. End quote. Here we have a historical map of the Straits of Gibraltar. Could it be that the Caribbean Sea has a similar geological history as the Mediterranean Sea? That is, could the Caribbean Sea have been a dry basin? Could it have been so during the existence of an anatomically modern man? Having performed an exhaustive search on the topic, I couldn't find a single source within the alternative literature, let alone a peer-reviewed scientific paper that put forth such a hypothesis. However, implausible this hypothesis may be, if true, it would provide a simple and elegant solution to the problem discussed, namely that of how a city could have been built close to 700 meters, 2,300 feet below the sea level today, or 580 meters, 1,900 feet below sea level during the maximum drawdown of the world's oceans. And the Caribbean Sea simply did not exist for an extended period of time in the human past. A reasonable advanced civilization inhabiting the area could have built cities on dry land thousands of feet below sea level, or even tens of thousands of feet below sea level. When the Caribbean Sea was formed, these cities would have submerged to the depths equivalent to the depth below sea level that were originally constructed. The Cuban underwater city would merely be one of these hypothetical cities. Thus, an explanation has been provided for the existence of the city at such great depth without recourse to either the city having collapsed to its depth or having been built underwater. The land and the sea. What are the necessary conditions for the Caribbean basin to have been dry? First, the West Indies archipelago, instead of being a string of islands lying above sea level, separated by numerous waterways lying below sea level, as it is now, would have had to be a strip of land lying above sea level throughout its entire length. In other words, the Yucatan Peninsula would have been connected to Cuba via a land bridge instead of being separated by a strait, and Cuba with Haiti, and Haiti with Puerto Rico, and so on, until finally the island of Grenada must have been connected to the South American mainland with a land bridge, instead of being separated from it by a strait. What's interesting about that is when I think it was Herodotus who was hanging out with the Egyptian priest, and they told him an interesting tale. You see, the Egyptian priest made this claim that they used to island hop to the North American lands. Now, when we look at this map and showing the how the various islands would have been connected to a via land bridge, either to South America, maybe possibly to North America as well. And you take into the account from the Egyptian priests about being able to essentially island hop their way to North America, thus allowing them to take breaks, resupply, replenish, refresh themselves, get necessary rest, and continue on their voyage. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that the sea level was at a vastly different depth as it is now. And we can't even forget about the work of Randall Carlson and how he himself was explaining that when we look at the water erosion on the Sphinx, he was talking about at one point there was a rainfall that lasted for thousands of years after this post cataclysm. You have this post cataclysmic event, you have this massive rainfall, you possibly also have the melting of certain large glacier areas. I don't know yet. This is part of my speculation hypothesis, so to speak. Then that would, in essence, change the entire environmental topography of areas. Because when those Egyptian priests were talking to Herodotus, they were talking past tense, that they used to be able to do this. Now they're unable to because those islands no longer exist. They're underwater now. So I think that Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, and many others, I cannot recall their names at the moment, their theories, their hypothesis, the Young and Dryas impact theory, which has now been confirmed as real, that all that information, all that evidence, it supports this hypothesis. And the problem is that the mainstream academia has been bought and paid for by federal governments, oligarchs, industrial military corporations, the church, to suppress any information regarding such fantastical civilizations that proliferate our world in the past. Excuse me, I just need to get a little sip. So we have to think about that. And I highly recommend people, please go out there and do your own research. Seek out the information about this. You know, I think it was Yoon. I know he said he scoured and he couldn't find anything. Um, that this article was written in either 2021 or 2022. So perhaps there might be new information out there to support this hypothesis. That's why I really stress people, to do your own research, to take everything that we've learned here and apply to whatever you feel of interest. So, I don't want you guys to think that I'm telling you what to think or believe or research. If this is something that tickles that itch, please go for it. Because I think there's a lot here. And when we look at what Herodotus was saying with the Egyptian priests and the work of Randall Carlson and others and Graham Hancock, it adds more weight to this hypothesis being more true than false. But let's continue. Indeed, if the West Indies were like the Central America isthmus, as it is today, unbroken and uniformly above sea level, the Caribbean basin would have effectively become what geologists refer to as a androtic basin, a basin that is isolated from the world ocean. However, the isolation of the Caribbean basin from the larger world ocean, through necessary, though necessary, is not in and of itself sufficient for it to have been dry. Well, I mean, this is something that just kind of popped in my head. The Caribbean plate, like the tectonic plate of the Caribbean continent, technic, Caribbean basin, however you want to put it. I could be wrong. Correct me in the comments section. But we have to think about the fact that there is a tectonic plate under the Caribbean. So, what are the chances that it may have been a partial continent, may have been a small one, may have been this large basin area, and there was a tectonic plate underneath it? Just something that popped into my brain. Let's continue. In order for the Caribbean to have been dry, there's another necessary condition that must have been met. Namely, there must have been an excess of evaporation over precipitation over the basin's watershed. Today, there is indeed an excess of evaporation over precipitation over the Caribbean region. But was this true throughout the entire time behaviorally modern humans have existed, which has witnessed a great variety of climatic conditions and cataclysmic events? Most likely the answer is yes, as the tropical and subtropical regions to which the Caribbean region belongs to have undergone minimal climatic variations even amid the tumult of the ice ages and the interglaciers that have been taking place over the Pleistocene epoch. Therefore, it is reasonable to infer that the Caribbean region had a water balance of evaporation and excesses of precipitation throughout much, if not all, of the human past, just as it does today. Yes, but I'm gonna just keep my comments to myself. Let's wrap this up. Taken together, these two conditions, both of which are necessary for the Caribbean basin to have been dry, are sufficient for this to have been so. That is, if the Caribbean basin were both isolated from the Atlantic Ocean and evaporation exceeded precipitation over its watershed, it must have been dry. Given that the latter condition has already been established as highly likely throughout the time period in which man existed, demonstrating that the former condition also held, shall suffice to prove that the Caribbean basin must have been dry. Thus, we have established that the Caribbean basin indeed could have been dry and hence habitable if the Caribbean basin were isolated. This begs the question: could the Caribbean basin have been isolated? In other words, could the West Indies archipelago, which is now an island arc interspread with deep and numerous waterways, have once been a continuous landmass uniformly above sea level akin to Central America Isthmus? And that concludes. Part 1 of the underwater city of Cuba. Now, we'll learn more in part 2, but one thing I wanted to bring up was, and I'll show you guys real quick. And perhaps in part 2 we'll watch this video. But this woman right here was one of the lead oh, oh Lord. Oh God. My dog just decided to, well, I have a 90-year-old dog and he just decided to piss all over his bed. Anyways. Yeah, so this episode, it's on the Sam Tripoli podcast. And it's Alien Assassinations, Men in Black Astral Projection, and the Modern Tower of Babel with Dark Journalists. Now, Dark Journalists brought up a very interesting topics. And he was essentially saying, and it takes to this woman right here, that the Vatican knows about Atlantis and its origins, and that they have copious amounts of their technology and history and what have you in their libraries. And when this woman right here, one of the lead researchers on the project, the Cuban government hired her to see what was going on anywhere off of Cuba. Bang, bang, boom, they find this underwater city. They then arrest her and imprison her for, I think he said, several weeks. And then this happened in, oh God, I don't remember, early 2000s. After discovering of this underwater city, the Pope visited Cuba. And Dark Journalist is saying that the Pope visiting Cuba and meeting with the head of Cuba was to essentially confirm, was this city part of the nation of Atlantis? Now, that's what he is claiming and saying. I'm not saying that he's right or wrong. I don't know. I'm just giving you some other information and where you can listen to it. It's on Sam Tripoli, and it's the latest one, like I said, Alien Assassinations with Dark Journalists. So I don't, I'm thoroughly convinced that there was a large global civilization. I am convinced that Atlantis may have been one of them. But I am also convinced that may have been hundreds of previous advanced civilizations before Atlantis. So we don't know necessarily whether or not this underwater city off of Cuba was a city state of Atlantis. We don't know. But when you look at the work of Anomalous, God, what was his name? Anomalous Explorer? Anomalous America? I can't remember his name, but he talks about how he studies and researches all of the old newspapers from the early 1900s and late 1800s. And the amounts of knowledge about giants and lost cities is astounding. And he was talking about how when they kept on digging and digging in North America, they would find a new type of civilization. They dig some more, another type of civilization. And you get this idea that North America, whatever it may be, anywhere, the Caribbean basin, there were a plethora of civilizations. Now, I'm under the impression that some of these civilizations were humanoid in origin and not necessarily human, the Homo sapiens that we have today. So I believe that, and some of my research has confirmed that. So we don't necessarily know about whether or not these civilized, previous advanced civilizations were even Homo sapiens. We don't know that. They may make those claims that they suspect it, but we actually don't know. Perhaps the Vatican knows. Perhaps uh, the American government and military industrial complex knows. Maybe they know as well. An intelligence apparatus, maybe they know. But I'm just saying that that's something to keep in mind when you do your own research. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Lounge Ronin. All things, everything. If you're new to the channel, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And until next time, stay positive, stay focused, stay true, and much love. Hello there, I'm Kios Ronin Beatmaker, and welcome to Ronin Art and Music, home to Ronin Music, Lounge Ronin, all things, everything, the Monday Mindset Rants, and Ronin Reviews. We strive to make holistic and authentic content that aims to improve your individuality, mental fortitude, and peace of mind. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Stay positive, stay focused, stay true, and much love. Now, back to the show.